I run about 400 acres of wheat and grain sorghum outside a town called Coldwater, down in the southwest corner of Kansas. My grandfather bought the land in 1962, and my father worked it after him, and by July 2020, I'd been running it alone for about 6 years. That summer was hot in a way that made the metal on the combine burn through work gloves, and I remember it because of what happened on the morning of the 18th. I got up before 5 like I always do. Coffee, boots, out the door. The dogs didn't come with me that morning because I was driving out to the North Quarter, and they hate the truck ride. I wanted to check the wheat before I started cutting later that week. It was ready, golden, dry, standing tall. I pulled up to the edge of the field, got out, and just stood there for a minute, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. About a third of it was gone, not trampled, not stolen in some messy way, harvested, cut clean, in perfect rows, about 120 acres of it, and the stubble was uniform, the kind of cut you get from a well-set combine header running at the right speed. The straw wasn't even scattered. Somebody had run a combine through my field in the middle of the night and left with the grain. I walked out into it. The stubble crunched under my boots the way it should. I bent down and rubbed the cut ends between my fingers. Fresh. Still had that green smell where the stem broke. Then I looked around for tracks. There weren't any. I need you to understand what that means. A combine weighs somewhere around 50,000 pounds loaded. It leaves ruts. It compresses the soil. Even on hard July ground, you get tire prints, chaff piles where it made turns, kernels scattered at the headland. There was nothing. The dirt around the cut area looked exactly the same as the dirt around the uncut area. I walked the whole perimeter of what had been taken. Not one tire track going in or out. I called the sheriff's office. Deputy came out, walked around with me, took some pictures. He was polite about it, but I could see he didn't know what to do with what he was looking at. He asked if I'd been drinking, then apologized for asking. He wrote it up as theft and told me to call my insurance. I called my insurance. They sent an adjuster the next day, a woman from Wichita, who spent about 2 hours out there and then sat in her car for another hour on the phone before coming to my porch and telling me she couldn't process the claim because she couldn't determine a method of loss. "I'm not saying you're lying," she said. "I'm saying I don't have a box to put this in." I asked around. My neighbor to the east is a guy named Randy, older, been out here his whole life. I drove over that afternoon and told him. He asked me 2 or 3 questions about the cut, real specific ones, like how tall the stubble was and whether the rows ran with my planting or across it. I told him with. He nodded and said he hadn't seen anything, hadn't heard anything, and then he changed the subject and asked about my mother. The guy on the other side, west of me, is Dale. Dale's about my age. He said he was up till around 1 in the morning that night finishing paperwork and hadn't heard an engine, and you'd hear it. A combine at night carries for miles out here. There's nothing to stop the sound. 2 weeks went by. I went about my work. I cut the rest of the North Quarter myself, and the yield was fine, actually a little above average on what was left, and I tried to put the thing out of my head. I told my wife's brother about it over the phone, and he laughed and said it was probably aliens. And I laughed too, because what else are you going to do? On the morning of August 2nd, I drove out to the south section to check on the grain sorghum. Same thing, different field, different crop, same cut. Clean rows, uniform stubble, no tracks, no chaff, no scatter. About 80 acres this time. I stood there for a long time. I didn't call the sheriff. I don't know why. I think I just knew what he was going to say. I drove into town that afternoon and bought 4 trail cameras, the kind hunters use, motion-triggered, infrared. I set them up around the remaining fields on fence posts and telephone poles, angled to cover the approaches. I checked the batteries twice. I wrote down the times I installed them in a little notebook because I wanted a record. Nothing happened for 11 days. On the 12th day, August 14th, I went out to check the west section, and there was a strip cut out of it, about 40 acres. I drove to each of the cameras and pulled the SD cards. Went inside, sat at the kitchen table, and put the first card in my laptop. The camera closest to the cut section had recorded normally all evening. I could see the light fade, see a rabbit go through the frame around 9, see the stars come out. Then, at 1:47 in the morning, the timestamp jumped to 6:52. No cut in the video, no black frame, no glitch. 1 second, it was 1:47 and dark, and my field was standing. The next frame, continuous, was 6:52 and the sun was coming up and the field was cut. I checked the other 3 cameras, same thing. Different timestamps by a minute or 2, but the same gap. About 5 hours missing out of each of them. The video files themselves weren't corrupted. The file sizes matched what you'd expect for the recorded length. It was as if the cameras had simply not existed during that window. I sat there for a long time. I made another pot of coffee and I watched the loop over and over. 1:47, 6:52. I drove over to Randy's place that evening. He was on his porch drinking a beer and he waved me up, and I sat down and I told him about the cameras. I told him about the missing time. I told him I didn't know what to do. He listened to the whole thing without saying a word. When I finished, he sat there looking at the sunset for what felt like a long time. Then he took a drink of his beer and set it down on the arm of the chair. "Mine too," he said. 3 years back, twice in one season. I asked him what he did. "Nothing. Waited it out. It didn't come back the next year. Hasn't come back since." I asked him if he ever figured out what it was. He looked at me then, and I remember his face very clearly because it wasn't scared. It was the face of a man who had made his peace with something a long time ago. "I decided it was better not to know," he said. "You start pulling on it, you're going to pull something out you can't put back. My advice, and I know you didn't ask, but my advice is you take what's left and you don't ask another question about the rest." I drove home. It was full dark by the time I got back. I sat on my own porch and I looked out at the fields, at the shape of them against the sky, and I listened for anything, and there was nothing to hear. I finished the harvest that year. What was left came in fine. The insurance never paid. I never found the grain. I still farm the same land. I took the cameras down that October, and I never put them back up. It's been 4 years, and nothing has happened since. I don't know if it's because of something I did, or something I didn't do, or if it just decided it was done with me. Some nights, in July especially, I'll be lying in bed, and I'll hear the wind moving through the wheat, and I'll listen for an engine I know isn't going to come, and I'll wonder what Randy meant when he said, "Pull something out." I worked the graveyard desk at a hostel in the Marigny the summer of 2020 when Bourbon Street was still half dead from the lockdown and most of the tourists coming through New Orleans were the kind who couldn't afford anywhere else. The place had 20 beds spread across 5 dorm rooms and 2 privates, a courtyard with a busted fountain, and a front door that stuck if you didn't lift it while pulling. My shift ran from 10 at night until 7 in the morning. I got paid in cash and a free bunk in the staff room upstairs. The owner, a guy everyone called Rooster, spent most of the summer down in Houma with his mother. He'd call in twice a week to ask about the numbers and remind me to run the credit card machine at close. Beyond that, the place was mine. August is dead for hostels in Louisiana. It's 100 degrees before noon, and the humidity makes your shirt stick to the plastic of the desk chair. In a normal year, we'd still get some Europeans passing through, but that year, we had almost nobody, which is why I noticed the group. 4 guys checked in on a Tuesday around midnight. Late 20s, clean shave, polite. They spoke English with an accent I couldn't place. The one who did the talking handed me 4 passports, all different countries, and paid 3 nights up front in cash. What I noticed was the bags. Each of them had one of those huge rolling duffels, the kind you'd take on a 2-week trip. They were heavy. I heard the wheels grinding on the tile as they went down the hall. They kept to themselves, didn't use the kitchen, didn't sit in the courtyard. On the 3rd night, around 4 in the morning, they walked out. I buzzed them through and said, "Have a good one." They said thanks. Each of them was carrying a small backpack. That was it. No duffels, no wheeled bags. I figured they'd left their stuff in the room and were going to the airport later, or they were meeting a car. I did my walkthrough of the private at 6, the way I always did after a checkout. The room was empty, and it was clean in a way that took a second to register. The sheets were stripped and folded on the foot of each bed. The bathroom smelled like bleach. There wasn't a hair in the drain. Somebody had wiped down the light switch. I thought that was strange, but I didn't think about it for long. Some people are neat. Some people are grateful for a cheap place and try to be respectful. I stripped the beds again for form and moved on. 2 weeks later, another group. 3 men this time. Different faces, different accents, different passports, same private room, and the guy doing the talking specifically asked for that one. Paid in cash for 4 nights, big rolling bags, wells grinding down the tile hallway. I looked up from the desk and clocked it, and something in my stomach turned over the way it does before you figured out why. They left on the 4th night around 3 in the morning, small backpacks, room spotless, sheets folded. That's when I started writing things down, not in the hostel system and not on the desk computer. I had a little notebook I kept in the pocket of my jacket, and I put in the dates, the passport numbers, the countries, physical descriptions, height, weight I could guess at, tattoos if I saw any, the way one of them walked with his right foot turned out. The 3rd group came a week after that. 4 of them. This time the bags told the opposite story. They came in with small backpacks. On the 3rd night, a car pulled up to the curb, a black SUV with tinted windows, and someone brought 2 huge duffels up to the room. Not the guests. A different guy who didn't check in, didn't sign anything, just carried the bags up and walked out. I saw him from the camera in the hallway. He was in the building maybe 90 seconds. The next morning the 4 guests left, rolling duffels, wheels grinding, heavy. I stood at the window and watched them load the SUV, same vehicle, different driver. At that point, I couldn't pretend anymore. I sat in the office chair at 7 in the morning with my notebook open, and I felt cold in a way that had nothing to do with the AC. Whatever was happening, I was the person letting them in. I was the person who buzzed the door. I thought about calling the local cops. Then I thought about who might be on payroll and what happens to a night clerk who names the wrong people in a city like this. I thought about just quitting and going back to my mom's place in Baton Rouge, load my truck in an afternoon, and be gone by sundown. Nobody would ask why. Rooster would find another kid in a week. I sat there until the sun came up over the courtyard wall and the neighbor's rooster started in. I didn't decide anything. I just went upstairs and slept. What I did the next day was go to a public library on Loyola, use one of their computers, and find the DEA tip form online. I typed up everything I had. Dates, passport numbers, descriptions, times, the SUV plate I'd caught on the camera. I hit submit, and I walked out, and I didn't tell anybody. They wrote back the next day, not a form letter, an actual agent, first name only, asking if I could talk on the phone. I called from a burner I bought at a gas station on St. Claude. He was calm. He didn't sound surprised by anything I said. He asked me a couple of clarifying questions, mostly about the private room and the SUV. And then he said something that stuck with me. He said, "We know that address. Thank you for confirming what we thought." He asked me to keep doing what I was doing. Log every group, every bag, every vehicle. If another group booked that private room, he wanted a message at least 24 hours before the checkout. He gave me an email that didn't look like a government email. He told me not to change my behavior at the desk, not to look at anyone longer than usual, not to ask any questions. You keep smiling and buzzing them in, he said. That's all. I did that for 3 more weeks. 2 more groups came through the private. I sent the emails from the library computer in the mornings before I went to sleep. Each time he wrote back within an hour, just a thumbs up or a short line saying, "Got it." Once he asked if the driver looked the same. I said yes. That was the only follow-up question he ever sent. I never met him. I never learned his last name. I have no idea if the name he gave me was his real one. The operation happened on a Sunday morning at the end of September. I wasn't working. I found out because Rooster called me around 10 and told me not to come in that night. The place was closed, some kind of situation, he'd explain later. He never really explained. The local news ran a short piece about a federal action at a property in the Marigny. No names, no arrests listed publicly. A neighbor I talked to a few days later said there had been a lot of unmarked cars on the block before dawn, and everything had been quiet by breakfast. The hostel reopened 2 weeks later under a different LLC. Rooster sold and moved back to Huma for good. I worked 1 more month at the new place, and then I left New Orleans. I still have the notebook. I keep it in a shoebox in the closet at my place now, along with the burner phone, which I never turned back on. I don't know what would happen if I did. Sometimes I think about those first 4 guys, how polite they were, the folded sheets, the wiped light switch, how much easier it would have been to not look up when the wheels hit the tile. I've been doing outpatient orthopedic work in Scottsdale for 11 years, and I check the tray twice before every case. Not because I'm anxious, because the second check is when you actually see things. The first pass is muscle memory. The second one is the eyes. That morning, the second pass is where I saw it. The patient was a woman in her 50s, scheduled for an arthroscopy on her right knee. Nothing exotic. She'd been prepped and moved to the pre-op bay by 7:40. The OR was cool, the way we like it, around 64 degrees, and Dana, our circulator, had already opened the packs. I remember she was humming something. Fleetwood Mac, I think. She always did that when we had a light board. I walked in, gowned but not gloved yet, and started the count. Everything on the Mayo stand looked right. Cannulas, shaver handpiece, probe, punches, ruler. The arthroscope itself was already docked to the tower. I checked the light cable. I checked the fluid lines. Then I looked at the tray of accessory instruments, the smaller pack we open for this particular procedure, and something in the corner of my eye didn't sit right. There was an extra piece. It was small. Maybe the length of my thumb, matte black plastic with a slightly ribbed surface, cylindrical, with a short cable coming out of one end. The other end had what looked like a service port connector, not a hemostat, not a bit driver, not anything from any orthopedic set I've ever opened in my career. I stood there for a second, gloved hand hovering, and did the thing you do. You reach for the reasonable explanation, new calibration probe, some accessory from the rep that got included in the last shipment. Maybe Dana put it there for a reason I didn't know about. "Dana," I said, "what's this?" She came over, leaned in, and her face did a small thing I've watched 100 times when something is wrong. Not panic, just the pause. "That's not mine," she said. "Not from the set?" "No, that's not from the set." Kevin, our anesthesiologist, was already in the room by then, running through his checks at the head of the table. He heard us and walked around. "What are we looking at?" he said, not really a question. I pointed. The cable from the little cylinder led down under the drape at the base of the tower. I lifted the drape carefully, with a clamp, not with my hand. The cable ran to the back of the tower and terminated in one of the service ports on the rear panel of the shaver console. There's a row of them back there. Most of them we never touch. Firmware ports, diagnostic ports, techs use them. I stood up. "The unit had service yesterday," I said. Dana nodded. "Around 4. That new company, the one operations switched to." Kevin looked at me over his mask. "You know what that thing is?" "No, neither do I. Honest thing is, in that moment, my first instinct was to keep going. The patient was in the next room. We were 15 minutes from wheel-in. I've had cases run over for stupider reasons than an odd piece of plastic on a tray, and I've caught grief from admin every time. There is a very real pressure in this job to keep moving. But I looked at that little black cylinder again, and I looked at the port it was plugged into, and I could not tell you what it was for. That was the part I couldn't get past. In an operating room, I know what every object does. I know why every wire connects to every other wire. That's not paranoia, that's just the job. I didn't know what this was. I pulled off my gown. "We're pushing back," I said. "Give me an hour." Kevin didn't argue. Dana didn't argue. She was already reaching for the phone on the wall. I went out and told the patient myself. Said we'd found a maintenance issue with one of the units, and we wanted to swap it out before we started. She was fine. People are almost always fine when you tell them the truth in a calm voice. Then I called Marcus. He was the technical director for the building, worked across 3 of the surgery centers in the network. He picked up on the second ring, and I described what I was looking at, and he was quiet for a long moment. "Don't unplug it," he said. "Don't touch it. I'm coming over." He was there in 20 minutes. He came into the OR with a small case and a laptop, and he crouched down behind the tower for what felt like a long time. Kevin and I stood by the door and didn't talk. Dana was in the sub-sterile room, rewrapping the tray we'd have to reprocess. When Marcus stood up, he looked older than when he came in. "It's a cell modem," he said. I said, "A what?" "Cellular modem, small one. It's been drawing power off the service port and pulling data off the console. Parameters, probably. Runtime logs, maybe patient throughput. Maybe usage patterns. I don't know yet. It's been transmitting to something on the outside. I'd have to pull it and open it to know more," Kevin said, very quietly. "How long?" Marcus shook his head. "Since yesterday, at the earliest. Since God knows when, at the latest. It could have been installed and swapped multiple times. The service port doesn't log." I didn't say anything for a while. I was thinking about the last month of cases, everything the console records, not names, not directly, but usage times, procedure lengths, error codes. Enough, if you were the right kind of person, to build a picture of a place, what it does, when it's busy, when it's not, who works, which shifts. Enough to plan something, if planning something was the point. I still don't know if it was. Marcus took the device with him in a small anti-static bag. Admin called the police that afternoon, and someone from the state came the next week. They ran the contractor. The license on file for the maintenance company was real on paper, matching a company that had actually existed in Phoenix, but that company had dissolved 4 years earlier. The certifications the technician showed at the front desk were photocopies. Good ones. The name he gave didn't match any current license in the state. Nobody remembered his face very clearly. He'd worn a mask, which in September of 2021 wasn't unusual. He'd been polite. He'd been in the building for about 40 minutes. We did the arthroscopy at 9:30 that morning. It went fine. The patient walked out on crutches by lunch and never knew anything had happened. I went home that night and sat in my car in the driveway for a while before I went inside. Not because I was scared, it was more that I kept turning the thing over in my head, the small black cylinder, and I kept coming back to the same place. I don't know what he was actually there for. I don't know if the modem was the point, or if the modem was a distraction for something else he did while he had 40 minutes alone with our equipment. I've had the whole tower replaced. I've had every port on every console in that OR audited. I checked the trays 3 times now instead of 2, but there were 3 weeks between his visit and the day I noticed. 3 weeks of cases I did on that machine. And the honest answer, the one I don't like, is that I have no idea what got out during those 3 weeks, or what didn't. Nobody does.